The myth of the 30-06, the world's most versatile cartridge. They say this thing is good for everything from varmints to the most dangerous game, but is that true? Let's find out on this episode of Ron Spomer Outdoors. So, don't touch that dial and don't walk away just because we're talking about this old war horse, the 30-06. We really need to look into this cartridge because, man, this thing's been around for 115 years or so. Can it possibly perform in the 21st century? Well, according to some of the data that I've looked up, it probably can. And yes, it can actually run pretty close to some of our most popular varmint cartridges. A 30 caliber varmint round? This sounds crazy. Before we go into the numbers, let's talk a little bit about where this 30-06 came from and why it's called the 30-06. Most of us know it's because it came out in 1906. The weird thing is a lot of younger folks wonder what the word "aught" means in that. 30-06, what's that "aught" thing? A guy the other day asked me what "odd" meant in it. It's not odd. Well, it sounds odd. It's ought. It's an old term for zero. So in the 1900s, the 0 years were known as the aught years, 1903 and 4 and 6 and such. So that's why it's called the 30-06. Now today, a lot of folks refer to it as the 30-06, but that is actually wrong. Because an O is a letter. It's an alpha character. It's not a number. So it's not 1906. It's really 06. So the aught makes more sense, but it's an old-fashioned term. At any rate, that's why we call it the 30-06. Where did it come from? Well, first step down, it came from the 1903 or the 1903 cartridge, which was a military cartridge, but that came from something the Germans started way back in 1888. They came out with a cartridge. One of the first smokeless cartridges was the 8mm Mauser. And they used that in World War I, and I think even into World War II they were shooting it. But the Spaniards took a different version of it. Peter Paul Mauser, who invented that Mauser action rifle and these cartridges, he came up with a stepped-down 8mm that was called the 7mm Mauser, and that's really where it all started. So this was used by the Spanish soldiers in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, and that's where we first met it. To our regret. Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, remember them? They ran up San Juan Hill and captured Kettle Hill and all that stuff. They were up against the 757s and they were mowing them down because the Spanish soldiers were up on the heights shooting down on us, so that was an advantage for them already. But the bigger advantage was the 150 grain bullet they had smoking out of that thing. They were just laying down some flat fire and we couldn't keep up. We were shooting the 30-40 Krag with a 220 grain bullet, didn't have the reach. 45-70s, that didn't have the reach. So when we got back from that war, Teddy Roosevelt and the military brass got to work on a new cartridge for us. And what came out of it was the 1903 cartridge, which shot a 220 grain round nose bullet. Didn't take them long to figure out that that was not fast enough. They needed to go to a faster bullet, so they tried 150 grain spire point, and it worked well, so they cut back the length of the neck just a little bit, I believe. And they named it the 30-06 or 06, 30-06. So that's where it came from. But it is so close to the 757 and the 8mm Mausers that Mauser was able to sue us for patent infringement. And he got some royalties. I think it amounted to about $200,000 for both the Springfield 03 bolt action rifle that we made, which looks a lot like a Mauser, uses that same claw extractor, and so we had to pay for that too. But at any rate, it might have cost us something, but we had a new rifle. That was really something. Teddy Roosevelt had one customized, I think, by Griffin and Howe. And he took that sporterized 03 military rifle over to Africa to hunt with and just had some wonderful luck with it. Shot very well with that. Well as he could shoot. He was pretty myopic. He didn't have the best eyes in the world, so he didn't shoot all that well. But boy, the 30-06 really impressed him. And then down the road, several other famous people took it over there. One was Ernest Hemingway in the 30s, and he famously shot a running rhinoceros at 300 yards and had a one-shot kill with a 30-06. So it got quite a reputation, and it was used on just about anything and everything around the world for a lot of years. But what we want to figure out is if it's viable this era. And that we're in the 21st century, and this thing is practically a product of the 19th century. So we're going back quite a ways. With modern powders and modern bullets, the 30-06 is really better than it ever was before. Instead of shooting a 150 grain bullet at the 2,700 feet per second it used to shoot, it's now up to 3,000 feet per second. I've got some pretty impressive numbers on some bullets here. We're going to check those out and compare the 30-06 to its competitors, which step all the way down to the 223, if you can believe that. Here's a popular varmint cartridge. How can a 30-06 compare to a 223 for varmint hunting? And then at the other end is the extreme big cartridges like a 375 H&H. Well, good grief, you're not going to get the 30-06 to perform like that, yet it has taken the same animals that the 375 has. So it's argued as a viable moose and big bear and big African antelope and dangerous game rifles. It's been used quite successfully on Cape buffalo. So how do we do it? Well, we do it with a lot of bullet selection. And that's one of the things that everybody brags about with the 30-06. It can shoot anywhere from a 100 grain plinker bullet all the way up to a 220 grain round nose bullet. Now, I don't have a 220 here. I've got a 210, but I'll give you an idea of the length we're getting to. Now, the 30-06 is generally put into a 1 10-inch twist barrel. And that will stabilize these bullets all the way up to 220 in some cases. But it has to be a round nose. If you make it a long pointed bullet like these burgers, it's too long to stabilize. It's the length of the bullet that makes it unstable in too slow of a twist, not the weight, the length. But most 30-06s will handle up to a 220 grain. So what is the advantage of that? We're going to see that here in a little bit on this paper. So let's compare the 30-06 and that little 223. Obviously, the 223 is a great varmint round. It's good for coyotes. Can the 30-06 with a 110 grain bullet, and let's go with a fairly efficient one right here. That, I think, is the Sierra. No, that's 125. It's a Burger, 110 grain bullet. Pretty sleek. Obviously, it's a stumpy little thing, but we can drive it pretty fast with all the powder in that 30-06. So I'm going to flash up on the screen some numbers here. You look at that. The load is a 30-06 with a 110 grain Varmageddon bullet from Nosler. I zero that at 217 yards to keep the peak trajectory no higher than 1.5 inches above the line of sight. Okay? The BC is pretty high on that bullet, 0.293. The muzzle velocity is really significant, 3,450 feet per second, and that was measured out of a 24-inch barrel by Nosler. Took all these numbers from their Nosler 9 manual. So look at the 300-yard performance compared to that 223 with a 55 grain ballistic tip bullet. That's a pretty popular and common varmint bullet, but it drops an inch more than the 30-06. It deflects 1.5 inches more in the wind. That's a 10-mile-an-hour right-angle wind, and it has a lot less energy. The 30-06 is a better varmint round than the 223. Of course, you're going to have a lot more powder. It's going to be more expensive, and you're going to have a little bit more recoil, but it really surprised me to see how well that little stumpy 110 grain bullet can do. Pretty impressive stuff. Now, most of us aren't going to buy a 30-06 to hunt varmints with, but a 150 grain bullet makes it an awfully effective pronghorn, sheep, whitetail, mule deer cartridge, right? That's what it's mostly used for. Let's just check out a 150 grain E-tip. That is an all copper bullet from Nosler. We're going to drive that thing at 3,050 feet per second, which is top end speed, but it was in their loading manual. And we're going to compare it to the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, everybody knows that's a long-range beauty, right? Minimal wind deflection. Look at the numbers on this. I'm using a 142 grain AccuBond long-range bullet, and that's got a high BC. We're driving it to what I consider a top velocity, 27-30. I don't often get much more than that. That's what the Nosler manual recommended as a top load. I know a lot of people will push them harder than that, but I'm not going there. At any rate, with those numbers, look at the drops at 300 yards. 30-06 does not drop as much as the 6.5 Creedmoor. It's got an inch advantage. Pretty cool. Now, the wind advantage does go to the Creedmoor. That's because of that high BC. A .625 BC on that 264 bullet off the 6.5, that's pretty significant compared to a .350 with a 30-06. So there is definitely an advantage to the Creedmoor. But the energy advantage goes to the 30-06. 1,732 foot-pounds of energy versus 1,686. Now, downrange, that's going to change because of the efficiency of that narrower bullet that will retain better energy at 500 and 600 yards. But most of us aren't hunting at those distances anyway. Now, let's go up to the big stuff. The 30-06 has a pretty good capacity of powder. It'll tank generally 57 to 63 grains of powder, depending on the type of powder and the bullet you're pushing. So you're going to be able to drive a fairly heavy bullet at some pretty decent velocities. And I think a 190 grain bullet in the 30-06 is about as far as I want to go and still do some decent long range shooting with it. So let's grab a 190 grain AccuBond long range with a high BC of .597 and a muzzle velocity. We can reportedly get it up to 2720. That's pretty darn fast for a 190 grain bullet. Let's compare it to the 7 Rem mag, because that is one of the cartridges that is said to have helped push the 30-06 to the background. And obviously that 7 Rem mag has got more powder. I mean, look at the size of that. It's got a fatter case, and it's the same length, and it has a sharper shoulder. So you've got a lot more powder capacity with that one. And you have a narrower bullet, so you're going to have a higher ballistics coefficient. It should be more efficient all the way around. Sure enough, the 7 beats the 30-06. You look at that 300-yard performance, and it's dropping 2 inches less than the 30-06. You've got a ½ inch advantage in the wind deflection department. Got a little more energy on it, just all the way around. But what impresses me about the 30-06 compared to the 7 Rem mag is just how close it does come with a lot less powder. So I think one could make a pretty good argument for that 30-06 hanging right in there out to 300 yards. And again, not many of us like to shoot farther than 300 yards at game anyway. I certainly try not to shoot any farther than that. Getting closer is always the best option. It just reduces all the variables that are going to mess up a shot. So if you're not the kind of person who's looking to do this 400 or 500 yard and farther shooting when you're hunting, you really might not need a Magnum. A 30-06 might be enough for you. And remember, you're going to have less recoil because you've got less powder. So all those things are worth considering. Now, let's go to the top end. When someone says the 30-06 is a viable, dangerous game cartridge, is that legit? Well, let's work with a 220 grain partition bullet. Now, that doesn't have the highest BC in the world, .351. I'm not worried about BC on dangerous game because we're going to get close. This is a bullet we want for the punch and the depth and the drive. We want a lot of weight back in the shank so that bullet can really have some momentum and continue to drive deep. So look at the numbers. You're going to drop 8.6 inches at 300 yards. Once again, who cares? I'm not shooting that far with this big bullet. Got 10 inches of deflection. Not horrible. 1,771 foot-pounds of energy. That doesn't sound like a lot of energy. But again, that's 300 yards. Let's look down at that final number. At 100 yards, you've got a +3 because of my trajectory. I zeroed that thing at 220 yards, so I'm going to be 3 inches high at 100. Wouldn't do that with a dangerous game setup either, but that doesn't matter for the energy. That's what we want to consider here. Look at that 2,708 foot-pounds of energy. That's retaining a goodly amount of energy, and when you put that behind a 220 grain bullet, you've got momentum, and that's what continues to drive that bullet deep. So you get a good controlled expansion bullet and drive it at that velocity and do your dangerous game hunting or your big bears or even moose inside of 200 yards, you're going to get some pretty impressive performance. So if you don't like the idea of a big, long, full-length Magnum action like the 375 H&H, and you don't want the recoil of a 250 grain bullet out of a 338 Win Mag, or even a 200 grain bullet out of the 300 Win Mag, consider that 30-06, because I don't think the moose or the bear is going to know the difference. So the 30-06 has been known now as the standard length. We often call it the long action. But really, the Magnums are the long action. That would be your 375 H&H class cartridge. And you can see how much longer they are than the 30-06. So the 30-06 has become kind of our standard length action. This is the Magnum length action. And then the 308 class of cartridges are known as the short actions. So a lot of people will prefer a short action rifle, a little handier, a little quicker. I don't worry too much about that, but you will get a little less recoil because you've got less powder in a 308. But the 30-06 gives you that advantage of more powder for those higher end bullets, the heavier bullets. So I think that's what makes it more versatile than the 308. And you can get pretty much any rifle in a 30-06. I mean, if someone manufactures rifles, they chamber for the 30-06, except for a lot of, obviously, the 223 length AR platforms. You're not going to have it. But bolt actions and pumps and some lever actions and lots of auto loaders and single shots like the Ruger #1, beautiful rifle to have in the 30-06. You're just going to find a rifle out there of the style that you like, the action that you like, and at a price point you like. You know, some of these $400, even $300 rifles these days are coming in shooting minute of angle, and you get it in 30-06, you're ready to hunt anything. So there's just incredible versatility. Now, if you're concerned about recoil, a couple of ways to handle that. One is, of course, to have a heavier rifle. The other is to use a lighter weight bullet. But the other one, I think, is to train. The 30-06 was used by the military for one reason, because the average soldier could handle it without flinching and shoot a lot. So it tells you that you should be able to handle that recoil with a little bit of training. And one of the ways I do that is to use good ear protection, because that really makes a difference when you don't hear that big roar. Always use great ear protection. And then put on a pad of some kind, a past recoil pad or something, and work your way up. And don't lie prone on the ground to shoot. That always emphasizes recoil. Stand up as you're training and rock back with a little bit of recoil, and you'll pretty soon get to appreciate that it really doesn't kick all that much. And if you're having trouble flinching, have your buddy load the rifle behind your back, only don't really load it. You're not going to know if it's got a live round in it or not, and if you flinch, you're going to feel it and see it, and it's going to look ridiculous. And after you've shot click, click, click a bunch of times and dry fired without flinching, pretty soon you relax and you start concentrating on the target and you shoot properly. And then you put a live round in and it goes off and you hit your target and you go, that didn't hurt. I can tell you that's the way it works because I did it. And my wife has done it. She's learned to shoot very well by that trick. So you might want to try that. But I just can't argue against that 30-06. It's just so versatile. It's been around for so long. And with modern bullets and modern powders, it's better than ever. If you're looking for a great all-around, do-everything cartridge, the old myth about the 30-06 is not a myth. That thing is the real deal. So more power to you if you're shooting a 30-06. If you haven't tried one yet, I'd urge you to give it a try, because this is one to what the mountain men used to say, ride the river with, 30-06. Hey, I'm Ron Spomer. Thanks for watching. I invite you to subscribe to our channel. And thanks to our Patreon members. Our patrons help fund the production of these videos, and we certainly appreciate that. You can join us on Patreon as well. We'd like that. And in the meantime, I invite everybody to hunt honest and shoot straight.